Racist teen vandalizes black man's car, then learns he's a famous lawyer. How will this story turn out? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of a bustling city center. People came and went, carrying shopping bags or hurrying to appointments. Among the neatly parked cars, a black sedan stood out, its gleaming surface spotless and its polished rims catching the sunlight. The car belonged to Marcus Reed, a sharp-dressed man in his early 40s, who had just stepped out of a nearby cafe with a to-go cup of coffee. Marcus was a man of habit. Every morning, he stopped at this cafe before heading to his office downtown. As a prominent civil rights lawyer, he spent his days advocating for justice, representing clients who often had no one else to turn to. Today was no different, or so he thought. As Marcus walked toward his car, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He paused to check the message, sipping his coffee as he did. That's when he heard it, the sound of spray paint hissing. His head snapped up, and his sharp brown eyes locked onto a young man standing beside his car. The teenager, dressed in a black hoodie and ripped jeans, held a can of yellow spray paint in his hand. He was grinning, his arm moving in bold strokes as he scrawled hateful words across the car's sleek surface. Marcus froze for a moment, his mind processing the scene in disbelief. The bright yellow paint spelled out slurs and phrases like, "Go back," and "expel." His heart clenched, but he forced himself to take a deep breath. He'd dealt with prejudice before, this wasn't new, but it never got easier. He stepped forward, his footsteps measured and deliberate. "Hey," he called out, his voice calm but firm. "What do you think you're doing?" The teen turned, startled at first, but quickly recovered. His grin widened into a sneer as he sized Marcus up. "What does it look like I'm doing?" He shot back, his voice dripping with defiance. "Just making the lot look better." Marcus didn't respond immediately. Instead, he studied the boy, maybe 17 or 18 years old, with a mop of unkempt brown hair and a chip on his shoulder. The boy's posture was cocky, but Marcus could see the tension in his grip on the spray can. He was trying to project confidence, but there was something deeper beneath it. Anger, insecurity, maybe even fear. "You think this is funny?" Marcus asked, his voice steady. "Destroying someone else's property?" The teen laughed, a harsh, hollow sound. "It's just a car," he said with a shrug. "Besides, people like you don't belong here anyway." Marcus felt the sting of the words but refused to let it show. He'd learned long ago that responding with anger only gave people like this more power. Instead, he crossed his arms and tilted his head slightly, his gaze unwavering. "People like me," he repeated, his tone thoughtful. "And what kind of people would that be?" The teen faltered for a split second, his bravado cracking under Marcus's calm scrutiny. But he quickly recovered, lifting his chin defiantly. "You know what I mean," he said. "You don't fit in here." Marcus took another step closer, his expression calm but unyielding. "Do you think that spray paint makes you look strong?" he asked. "Because all I see is a scared little boy trying to feel important." The teen's face flushed red, and his grip on the can tightened. "I'm not scared," he snapped. "And you don't get to tell me what I am." Marcus nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving the boy's face. "You're right," he said. "I don't. But your actions speak for themselves." By now, a small crowd had started to gather, drawn by the confrontation. Passers-by paused to watch, their expressions a mix of curiosity and disapproval. A few people pulled out their phones, recording the scene. Marcus noticed the attention but kept his focus on the teen. "What's your name?" Marcus asked, his tone even. The boy hesitated, his bravado faltering again. "Why do you care?" he muttered, avoiding Marcus's gaze. "Because I like to know who I'm talking to," Marcus said simply. "And because I think you owe me an explanation." The teen glanced around, his confidence wavering under the weight of the stares from the growing crowd. He looked back at Marcus, his jaw clenched, but he didn't answer. Marcus sighed, his disappointment evident. "You can't even own up to what you've done," he said quietly. "That says a lot." The words hit their mark, and the boy's shoulders stiffened. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, a voice from the crowd called out. "Hey, is that your car?" A woman asked, stepping forward. She was holding a phone, her finger hovering over the screen. "Should we call the police?" The teen's eyes widened slightly, and he took a step back, his earlier confidence slipping away. Marcus held up a hand, signaling for the woman to wait. "Not yet," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Let's see if he's willing to make this right." The teen's gaze darted between Marcus and the woman, his mind clearly racing. For the first time, he seemed to realize the seriousness of the situation. But instead of apologizing, he turned and bolted, the spray clattering to the ground as he ran. The crowd murmured in surprise, and a few people called after him, but no one moved to stop him. Marcus watched him go, a mix of frustration and sadness flickering in his eyes. He picked up the can of spray paint and looked at the hateful words scrawled across his car. The damage was done, but the boy's actions had only revealed his own weakness. Marcus turned to the crowd, his expression calm but resolute. "Thank you all for your concern," he said. "I'll handle this." The crowd began to disperse, though a few people lingered, offering their support. Marcus nodded politely, appreciating their kindness, but his mind was already focused on the next steps. This wasn't the first time he'd faced something like this, and it wouldn't be the last. But he wasn't going to let it slide. He pulled out his phone and snapped a few pictures of the car, making sure to capture the graffiti from every angle. He also noted the boy's appearance in his mind, his height, his clothes, the defiant look in his eyes. Marcus didn't know the boy's name yet, but he had a feeling it wouldn't take long to find out. Marcus stood in the parking lot for a few moments, his sharp gaze scanning the area where the teen had run off. He was no stranger to moments like these, but each one carried a distinct weight. It wasn't just the vandalism, it was the hatred behind it, the assumptions, the anger. Still, Marcus had learned long ago how to channel his own frustration into action. That's what made him the lawyer he was today. He looked down at the spray paint can in his hand, shaking it slightly. A fine rattle came from within, the sound crisp and empty. He set it down carefully on the curb before turning back to his car. The words scrawled across its surface felt almost glaring in the bright sunlight. Expel, leave, and other hateful slurs that he didn't want to read again. People walked past, glancing at him and the car but saying nothing. Some looked uncomfortable, their gazes darting away as though they weren't sure how to react. Others lingered for a moment, their curiosity evident before they moved on. Marcus sighed and reached into his pocket for his phone. He took a deep breath before dialing the number he knew would set things in motion. 911, what's your emergency? Came the calm voice on the other end. This isn't an emergency, Marcus said evenly, but I'd like to report vandalism on private property. My car was spray-painted in the parking lot of Bridgeview Plaza. The dispatcher asked him a few questions, and Marcus provided all the details, his voice steady and composed. He described the boy who had fled the scene, his voice never betraying the simmering frustration he felt. He'd learned how to keep his emotions in check, even when the situation called for outrage. An officer will be dispatched to your location shortly, the dispatcher assured him before ending the call. As Marcus lowered his phone, he noticed someone standing a few feet away. It was the woman who had earlier offered to call the police. She looked at him with a mixture of sympathy and hesitation, as though unsure whether to approach. "Are you okay?" she asked finally, stepping closer. Marcus gave her a small, polite smile. "I'm fine," he said. "Thank you for asking." She glanced at the car, her brow furrowing. "It's just so awful. I don't understand how people can do something like this." "Neither do I," Marcus replied. "But unfortunately, it happens more often than it should." The woman nodded, her expression softening. "If you need anything, witness statements or anything like that, let me know. I was here when it happened." "I appreciate that," Marcus said. "Thank you." The woman nodded again before walking away, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts. He knew he had done the right thing by calling the police, but part of him wondered if it would make any difference. Would the boy face any real consequences? Or would this be brushed aside as a youthful mistake? It wasn't long before a police car pulled into the parking lot, its lights flashing but its sirens silent. Two officers stepped out, one a middle-aged man with a tired expression, the other a younger woman who seemed more alert and engaged. They approached Marcus with measured steps, their eyes taking in the vandalized car. "Are you the one who called this in?" the male officer asked. "I am," Marcus said, extending a hand. "Marcus Reed." The officer shook his hand before introducing himself as Officer Clark. The younger officer introduced herself as Officer Simmons, her sharp gaze already scanning the graffiti on the car. "Can you walk us through what happened?" Simmons asked, pulling out a notepad. Marcus recounted the events calmly, describing how he had caught the boy in the act and confronted him. He provided as much detail as he could about the teen's appearance and demeanor, careful not to embellish or leave anything out. "And then he ran off," Marcus finished, dropped the spray paint can and took off through the lot. Simmons nodded, jotting everything down. "Did you recognize the boy? Have you seen him before?" "No," Marcus said, "but I'm sure we can figure out who he is. There were plenty of witnesses, and there are probably security cameras in the area." Clark, who had been examining the car, nodded in agreement. "We'll check with the building management and see if we can get access to the footage. In the meantime, we'll file this as an official report." "Thank you," Marcus said. His tone was polite, but there was a firmness in his voice that suggested he expected results. Simmons glanced at him, her expression curious. "Mr. Reed," she said, "if you don't mind me asking. You seem pretty composed for someone whose car was just vandalized." Marcus gave her a small smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I've learned how to stay composed in situations like these," he said. "Getting angry doesn't solve anything." Simmons nodded, her respect evident. "Well, we'll do everything we can to find the suspect." As the officers worked, Marcus leaned against a nearby lamppost, his arms crossed over his chest. He watched them photograph the car and collect the spray paint can as evidence. His mind wandered briefly to the boy. What had driven him to do this? Hatred? Ignorance? A desperate need for attention? Whatever the reason, Marcus knew one thing. The boy would have to face the consequences of his actions. Later that evening, Marcus sat in his office, reviewing case files as the city lights twinkled outside the window. His desk was cluttered with papers, sticky notes, and a steaming cup of coffee that he had barely touched. The events of the day lingered in his mind, refusing to be pushed aside. He picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he was looking for. It was a colleague in the city's legal department, someone who had access to juvenile records and could help track down the boy's identity. "Hey, Marcus," the voice on the other end greeted him. "What's up?" "I need a favor," Marcus said, cutting straight to the point. "There was an incident today. My car was vandalized. The suspect is a teenage boy, probably around 17 or 18. I've already filed a police report, but I want to make sure we follow through on this." His colleague sighed. "Sorry to hear that. Do you have any leads?" Marcus described the boy as best he could, providing the same details he had given the police. His colleague listened carefully, then promised to look into it and get back to him. "Thanks," Marcus said. "I appreciate it." "Anytime," his colleague replied. "And Marcus, don't let this get to you. You're stronger than that." Marcus smiled faintly. "I know, but it's not about me. It's about the message it sends if we let this slide." "Fair point," his colleague said. "I'll be in touch." As Marcus ended the call, he leaned back in his chair, his thoughts heavy. He wasn't just doing this for himself. He was doing it for every person who had ever been targeted, dismissed, or made to feel like they didn't belong. This wasn't just about a car. It was about standing up to prejudice and showing that actions had consequences. The next morning, Marcus received a call from Officer Simmons. They had reviewed the security footage and identified the boy. His name was Ryan Parker, a high school senior who lived in a nearby neighborhood. Simmons explained that they had spoken to Ryan's parents, who were mortified by their son's actions. "They've agreed to bring him in for questioning," Simmons said. "We'll let you know how it goes." "Thank you," Marcus said. "I'd like to be kept updated." As he ended the call, Marcus felt a sense of satisfaction. The pieces were falling into place, and soon, Ryan would have to answer for what he had done. The news that Ryan Parker had been identified as the vandal quickly spread through the community. The small neighborhood Marcus lived in was close-knit, and word traveled fast, especially when the story involved such a blatant act of prejudice. For many, it was shocking to hear that a teenager from their own streets could commit such a hateful act. For others, it was a grim reminder of the biases that still lingered beneath the surface of everyday life. Marcus, however, wasn't surprised by the mixed reactions. He had spent years fighting for justice in courtrooms, witnessing how people's prejudices often hid behind polite smiles and small-town charm. But he also knew that change was possible. That was why he had pursued this case so relentlessly, not out of revenge, but out of a desire to hold Ryan accountable and create a moment for growth and reflection. Later that afternoon, Marcus received another call from Officer Simmons. "We've spoken to Ryan and his parents," she said. "They're willing to meet with you, if you're open to it." Marcus leaned back in his chair, considering her words. Confronting Ryan face-to-face wasn't something he had expected so soon, but the opportunity intrigued him. If handled correctly, it could be a chance to do more than just assign blame. It could be a chance to teach. "I'm open to it," Marcus said. "When and where?" Simmons gave him the details. Ryan and his parents had agreed to meet at the police station the following day. It would be an informal meeting, a chance for Marcus to share his perspective and for Ryan to explain himself. Simmons assured him that she and Officer Clark would be present to ensure things remained civil. Marcus thanked her and ended the call, his thoughts swirling. He didn't know what to expect from Ryan. An apology, perhaps, or more defiance. Either way, Marcus was determined to remain calm and composed. This wasn't just about justice, it was about showing Ryan a better path. The next day, Marcus walked into the police station with his usual quiet confidence. Dressed in a tailored suit, his presence commanded respect, though he carried himself with humility. Officer Simmons greeted him at the front desk and led him to a small conference room where the meeting would take place. Inside, Ryan sat at the table, his shoulders hunched and his gaze fixed on the floor. His parents sat beside him, their expressions a mix of embarrassment and concern. Marcus studied the scene for a moment, noting the tension in the air. Ryan's mother fidgeted with her hands, while his father sat rigidly, his jaw clenched. "Mr. Reed, thank you for coming," Simmons said, gesturing for Marcus to take a seat across from the family. Marcus nodded and sat down, his calm gaze resting on Ryan. The boy looked younger than Marcus had expected, his defiance from the parking lot replaced by nervousness. His hoodie was gone, replaced by a clean button-down shirt that seemed out of place on him. He looked uncomfortable, as though he'd rather be anywhere else. "Ryan," Marcus began, his tone measured, "do you know why we're here?" Ryan hesitated, his eyes darting toward his parents before returning to the table. "Yeah," he muttered. "Then let's talk about it," Marcus said. "Why did you vandalize my car?" Ryan didn't answer right away. He shifted in his seat, his hands gripping the edges of the table. His parents exchanged a glance, and his mother placed a hand on his arm, urging him to speak. "I don't know," Ryan said finally, his voice barely audible. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You don't know? Because when I confronted you, you seemed pretty sure of yourself." Ryan's cheeks flushed, and he looked away. I don't know. It was stupid." "It was more than stupid," Marcus said, his voice firm but calm. "It was hateful. You didn't just damage my property, you sent a message. A message that people like me don't belong here. So I'm asking you again, why did you do it?" Ryan's father cleared his throat, his expression tight. "Ryan, answer the man." Ryan's jaw tightened, and he finally looked up at Marcus. "I was mad," he admitted. "Okay? I was mad about everything. My friends were talking about how things aren't fair anymore, how people like you get special treatment." Marcus's eyes narrowed slightly, but he kept his tone steady. "Special treatment," he repeated. "And what does that mean to you?" Ryan hesitated, clearly unsure how to respond. "I don't know," he said again, his voice defensive. "It's just what I've heard." Marcus sighed, leaning back in his chair. Let me tell you what I've heard. Ryan, I've heard people say that my success as a lawyer must be because of affirmative action, not because of the years of hard work I put in. I've heard people assume that I got my education handed to me, not because I earned it. And I've heard people like you say that I don't belong in places like this. Places where I've lived and worked for decades. Ryan shifted uncomfortably, his face reddening. His mother looked close to tears, while his father's expression remained stoic. But here's the thing, Marcus continued. None of those things are true. I've worked harder than most people I know to get to where I am today. And I've done it while facing the kind of prejudice that you showed in that parking lot. So when you say you were mad about special treatment, what you're really saying is that you didn't take the time to think for yourself. You listened to your friends, your anger, and your ignorance. Ryan stared at him, his mouth opening as if to respond, but no words came out. Marcus let the silence hang in the air for a moment before leaning forward. I'm not here to lecture you, Ryan, he said. I'm here because I want you to understand the weight of what you did. This isn't just about spray paint. It's about what it represents. And you need to decide what kind of person you want to be moving forward. Ryan's mother wiped her eyes, her voice trembling as she spoke. Mr. Reed, we're so sorry for what our son did. This isn't how we raised him. Marcus glanced at her, his expression softening slightly. I appreciate that, he said. But this isn't about you. It's about him. Ryan's father finally spoke, his tone gruff. Ryan, you owe this man an apology. A real one. Ryan swallowed hard, his hands tightening into fists before relaxing. He looked at Marcus, his eyes filled with a mix of shame and uncertainty. I'm sorry, he said, his voice cracking. I was wrong. I shouldn't have done it. Marcus nodded, his expression unreadable. Apology accepted, he said. But like I told you before, it's not just about words. It's about actions. So here's what we're going to do. Ryan looked at him, his brow furrowing in confusion. What do you mean? You're going to make this right, Marcus said firmly. You're going to pay for the damage to my car. And you're going to spend the next month volunteering at the community center downtown. Ryan's eyes widened. Volunteering? Yes, Marcus said. You'll spend time with the very people you think don't belong here. You'll listen to their stories, see their struggles, and hopefully learn something. If you're willing to do that, then maybe, just maybe, you'll start to understand what it means to be a part of this community. Ryan's parents both nodded, their agreement clear. That sounds fair, his father said, and we'll make sure he follows through. Ryan hesitated, his gaze dropping to the table again. After a long pause, he nodded. Okay, he said quietly. I'll do it. Marcus studied him for a moment, then extended a hand across the table. Then we have a deal. Ryan hesitated again before reaching out and shaking Marcus's hand. The gesture felt heavy with significance, a first step toward understanding, if not redemption. The deal had been made, and Ryan left the police station that day with the weight of his actions pressing heavily on his shoulders. His parents were uncharacteristically silent during the car ride home, the tension palpable. Ryan sat in the back seat, staring out the window, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. He replayed the conversation with Marcus over and over, the man's calm yet unyielding demeanor standing in stark contrast to the anger and defiance Ryan had felt when he vandalized the car. At home, his father finally broke the silence as they stepped into the house. You're grounded, he said flatly, his voice leaving no room for argument. No phone, no going out, nothing until we're sure you've learned something from this. Ryan didn't argue. For the first time, he wasn't sure he even wanted to. Instead, he nodded, his shoulders slumping as he headed upstairs to his room. His mother called after him, her voice softer but still firm. Dinner will be ready soon. And Ryan, think about what you're going to say when you start at that community center. The following Saturday, Ryan found himself standing outside the Bridgeview Community Center, a small, unassuming building nestled between a grocery store and a laundromat. He had barely slept the night before, his mind racing with anxiety and resentment. The idea of volunteering here made his stomach churn. It wasn't just the work, though he wasn't looking forward to that either. It was the idea of facing the very people Marcus had described, the ones he had dismissed so easily with his spray-painted slurs. He took a deep breath and pushed open the door. The smell of fresh coffee and cleaning supplies greeted him, and the sound of laughter and chatter filled the air. Inside, the center was bustling with activity. Children ran around with crayons and coloring books, while adults sat at tables, chatting or helping each other with various tasks. A woman in her 30s with curly hair and a warm smile approached him. "You must be Ryan," she said, extending a hand. "I'm Carla, the coordinator here." Ryan hesitated before shaking her hand, his grip awkward and unsure. "Yeah," he mumbled. "That's me." "Glad you're here," Carla said, her tone genuine. "Let me show you around and get you started." She led him through the center, explaining its purpose as they walked. "We serve the community in a lot of ways," she said, "from food drives to tutoring programs to job training workshops. It's a place where people can come together and support each other." Ryan nodded, though he didn't say much. He felt out of place here, his discomfort growing with every step. Carla seemed to sense it, but she didn't push him to talk. Instead, she handed him an apron and directed him to the kitchen, where a group of volunteers was preparing meals for a weekend food distribution program. "This is Mrs. Jenkins," Carla said, introducing him to an older woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. "She'll show you what to do." Mrs. Jenkins looked Ryan up and down, her sharp gaze taking in his slouched posture and hesitant demeanor. "Well, don't just stand there," she said, handing him a pair of gloves. "We've got work to do." Ryan spent the next few hours chopping vegetables, packing meal boxes, and listening to Mrs. Jenkins tell stories about her years volunteering at the center. At first, he barely spoke, but as the hours passed, he found himself relaxing slightly. The work was tedious but straightforward, and there was something oddly soothing about the rhythm of it. By the end of the day, Ryan was exhausted but strangely lighter. As he pulled off his gloves and apron, Mrs. Jenkins gave him a nod of approval. "Not bad for your first day," she said, "but don't think you're off the hook yet. We'll see you bright and early next weekend." Ryan managed a small smile. "Okay," he said quietly. The next few weeks followed a similar pattern. Every Saturday, Ryan showed up at the community center, where Carla and the other volunteers put him to work. He spent time in the kitchen, sorting donations, and even helping with tutoring sessions for the younger kids. At first, he kept to himself, but gradually he began to open up. The people he met at the center weren't what he had expected. They weren't the caricatures he had imagined when he sprayed those hateful words on Marcus's car. They were just people, kind, hardworking, and resilient. One Saturday, as Ryan was helping a boy named Jamal with his math homework, he noticed Marcus walk into the center. Marcus was greeted warmly by Carla, who shook his hand and exchanged a few words with him before pointing him toward the tutoring area. Ryan's stomach dropped as Marcus approached, his tall frame and calm demeanor commanding attention. "Good to see you again, Ryan," Marcus said, his tone neutral but not unkind. Ryan swallowed hard. "Hi," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus glanced at the table where Jamal was working on a set of math problems. "You're helping out with tutoring?" "Yeah," Ryan said, his cheeks flushing. "It's not too bad." Marcus nodded, pulling up a chair beside him. "Good. It's important work. These kids look up to you more than you realize." Ryan glanced at Jamal, who was busy erasing a mistake on his worksheet. "I don't know about that," he muttered. Marcus studied him for a moment before speaking. "Ryan, do you know why I asked you to volunteer here?" Ryan hesitated before shaking his head. "Not really," he admitted. "Because I wanted you to see people for who they really are," Marcus said. "Not the stereotypes you've been told, not the assumptions you've made. Just people. Everyone here has a story just like you do. And when you take the time to listen, you start to understand that we're not as different as you think." Ryan didn't respond right away. He thought about the people he had met at the center. Mrs. Jenkins with her sharp wit and big heart, Carla with her endless optimism, and the kids like Jamal who worked so hard despite the challenges they faced. He thought about the way they had accepted him, even though he didn't deserve it. "I think I get it," he said finally, his voice quiet. "I was wrong." Marcus nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. That's a good start. As the weeks turned into months, Ryan continued to volunteer at the center, even after his required time was up. He had come to genuinely enjoy the work and the connections he had built. He started to see the community in a new light, recognizing its strength and resilience in ways he had never understood before. One afternoon, as he was helping Carla organize supplies, she handed him a small envelope. "This is for you," she said with a smile. Ryan opened it and found a handwritten note inside. It was from Marcus. "Ryan," the note read, "I've watched you grow over these past few months, and I'm proud of the progress you've made. Change isn't easy, but you've taken the first steps, and that matters. Keep learning, keep listening, and keep striving to be better. You have more potential than you realize." Marcus Reed. Ryan stared at the note for a long moment, his chest tightening with emotion. He didn't know how to put into words what he was feeling, but he knew one thing for certain. Marcus had given him a second chance, and he wasn't going to waste it. Ryan folded the note carefully, sliding it back into the envelope. He glanced over at Carla, who was busy stacking boxes of canned goods, and felt an overwhelming mix of emotions. The weight of Marcus's words sat heavily on his chest, but it wasn't a bad kind of weight. It was the kind that made him feel seen, challenged, and, for the first time, hopeful about the kind of person he could become. That evening, as Ryan sat at his desk in his bedroom, he found himself pulling out a notebook and writing down everything that had happened over the past few months. It wasn't something he'd ever done before, but the words seemed to pour out of him. He wrote about how he had felt when he vandalized Marcus's car. Angry, frustrated, and desperate for attention. He wrote about his first day at the community center, how uncomfortable he had been, and how he had wanted to run away. And he wrote about the people he had met, the lessons he had learned, and the way his perspective had shifted. By the time he put down his pen, the pages were filled with messy handwriting and raw emotion. Ryan stared at the notebook for a long moment before closing it and tucking it away in a drawer. He wasn't sure why he had written it all down, but it felt like a small step toward understanding himself better. The next Saturday, Ryan arrived at the community center early. The building was quiet, the usual hum of activity not yet in full swing. Carla greeted him with her usual warm smile, handing him a clipboard with a list of tasks for the day. "Looks like you're becoming our star volunteer," she teased. "You're always the first one here." Ryan chuckled, a little embarrassed. "I guess I like the quiet before everything gets busy." "Well, we appreciate you," Carla said sincerely. "The kids look up to you, you know." Ryan blinked, surprised. "They do." "Of course," Carla said. "You've been helping them with their homework, playing games with them, and just being here. That means a lot to them." Ryan nodded slowly, her words sinking in. It was hard to believe that just a few months ago, he had been someone who dismissed these kids without a second thought. Now they felt like a part of his world, and he couldn't imagine not being here. Later that day, Marcus stopped by the center, as he often did, to check in and offer support. He spotted Ryan organizing shelves in the supply room and walked over. "Ryan," Marcus said, his voice warm. "How's it going?" Ryan looked up, a smile breaking across his face. "Good," he said. "Just keeping busy." Marcus leaned against the doorway, studying him for a moment. "You've come a long way," he said. "I hope you're proud of yourself." Ryan shrugged, though his expression was thoughtful. "I don't know if I'm proud yet," he admitted, "but I feel better." "That's a start," Marcus said. "Growth takes time, but the fact that you're here putting in the effort says a lot." Ryan hesitated before speaking. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," Marcus said. "Why did you give me a chance?" Ryan asked, his voice quiet. "I mean, after everything I did, you could have just pressed charges and walked away." Marcus's expression softened. "Because I've been where you are," he said. "Not in the same way, but I've felt anger and frustration. I've made mistakes, and I've had people who gave me second chances when I didn't deserve them. Those second chances changed my life. I wanted to do the same for you." Ryan nodded, his throat tightening. "Thanks," he said. "For everything." "You're welcome," Marcus said. "Just remember, it's not about where you've been. It's about where you're going." As the weeks went on, Ryan continued to grow more comfortable at the community center. He found himself taking on more responsibilities, mentoring younger volunteers, and even helping to organize events. The boy who had once lashed out in anger was now someone who others looked to for guidance and support. One day, Carla approached him with a surprising proposition. "Ryan, we're hosting a fundraiser next month, and we'd love for you to be a part of it," she said. "We were thinking you could share your story, talk about how you've grown and what the center means to you." Ryan's eyes widened. "Me? Talk in front of people?" Carla smiled. "You don't have to if you're not comfortable," she said, "but I think it could be really powerful. You've come so far, and your story could inspire others." Ryan hesitated, the idea both thrilling and terrifying. He had never been one to speak in front of crowds, and the thought of sharing something so personal made his palms sweat. But he also knew how much the center had changed his life, and if sharing his story could help others, it might be worth it. "Okay," he said finally. "I'll do it." Carla beamed. "I knew you'd say yes. Don't worry. We'll help you every step of the way." In the weeks leading up to the fundraiser, Ryan worked with Carla and Marcus to prepare his speech. They sat together in one of the meeting rooms at the center, going over drafts and practicing delivery. "Just speak from the heart," Marcus advised. "You don't have to be perfect. Just be honest." Ryan nodded, though he still felt a flutter of nerves every time he thought about standing in front of an audience. He practiced late into the evenings, standing in front of his bedroom mirror and reciting his words until they felt natural. The day of the fundraiser arrived, and the community center was buzzing with energy. Tables were set up with raffle prizes, food trucks lined the street outside, and a stage had been erected in the main hall for speeches and performances. Ryan stood backstage, his hands gripping the note cards he had written his speech on. "You've got this," Carla said, giving him a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "Just take a deep breath and remember why you're doing this." Ryan nodded, inhaling deeply as he stepped out onto the stage. The room was packed with people, volunteers, community members, and even some of his classmates who had come to support the event. His parents sat in the front row, their expressions a mix of pride and anticipation. And standing off to the side was Marcus, his presence steady and reassuring. Ryan stepped up to the microphone, his heart pounding in his chest. He took another deep breath, then began to speak. "Hi, everyone," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "My name is Ryan Parker, and I've been volunteering here at the community center for the past few months. But if you had told me a few months ago that I'd be standing here today, I wouldn't have believed you." The crowd chuckled softly, and Ryan relaxed a little. He looked down at his note cards but quickly realized he didn't need them. The words were already in his heart. "When I first came here, it wasn't by choice," he continued. "I had made a huge mistake, one that I regret more than anything. I vandalized someone's car, and I hurt people with my actions and my words. I was angry, and I didn't know how to deal with it, so I took it out on someone who didn't deserve it." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. "But instead of punishing me, that person gave me a second chance. He brought me here to this community center, and it changed everything. I met people who taught me about kindness, resilience, and what it means to truly belong. And I realized how wrong I had been. Not just about them, but about myself." The room was silent, every eye fixed on him. Ryan took another deep breath, his voice steady now. "I'm still learning, and I know I have a long way to go. But I want to say thank you to Marcus, to Carla, to everyone here, for showing me that it's never too late to change." The crowd erupted into applause, and Ryan felt a wave of relief and pride wash over him. As he stepped off the stage, Marcus was there to greet him, his hand extended. "You did good, Ryan," Marcus said, his voice filled with pride. Ryan shook his hand, his grip firm. "Thank you," he said, "for everything." The applause from the audience still echoed in Ryan's ears as he stepped off the stage. The weight he'd carried for months, the guilt and shame of his actions, felt lighter now. Sharing his story wasn't just about making amends. It was about owning up to his mistakes and showing that he was committed to being better. As the fundraiser continued, Ryan mingled with the crowd. People came up to him, offering words of encouragement and praise. Some thanked him for his honesty, while others shared their own experiences of growth and second chances. Ryan listened intently, humbled by their words and grateful for the support. One conversation stood out. A young boy, no older than 12, approached Ryan with wide eyes and a shy smile. "Hi," the boy said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just wanted to say, your story was really cool. I mess up a lot, too. But hearing you talk made me feel like maybe I can be better." Ryan's chest tightened, and he knelt down so he was eye level with the boy. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Evan," the boy said. "Well, Evan," Ryan said with a smile, "we all mess up. What matters is what we do after. If you're trying to be better, you're already on the right path." Evan beamed, and Ryan felt a surge of pride. For the first time, he saw how his actions could ripple outward, affecting others in ways he hadn't imagined. He wasn't just repairing the damage he'd done, he was building something new. Later that evening, as the fundraiser wound down, Marcus found Ryan standing near the entrance of the community center, looking out at the streetlights flickering to life. The air was cool and crisp, carrying with it the faint hum of the city. "Deep in thought?" Marcus asked, stepping beside him. Ryan nodded, his hands stuffed into his pockets. "Yeah, just thinking about everything. How much has changed?" Marcus smiled, his gaze thoughtful. "It's a lot to take in, isn't it?" "Yeah," Ryan admitted. "I didn't think it was possible to feel this different." Marcus studied him for a moment before speaking. "Ryan, change isn't just about what you do. It's about how you see the world. You've started to see things differently, and that's where real growth begins." Ryan nodded, letting the words sink in. "I still have a lot to figure out," he said quietly. "We all do," Marcus replied. "The important thing is that you're willing to keep learning. And from what I've seen, you're on the right track." Ryan looked at Marcus, his eyes filled with gratitude. "I don't think I've ever thanked you properly," he said, "for giving me a second chance. For not giving up on me." "You don't need to thank me," Marcus said. "Just keep moving forward. That's thanks enough." The following weeks saw Ryan continuing to volunteer at the community center, even after the fundraiser was over. He had become a familiar and trusted presence, helping out wherever he was needed and forming strong connections with the people around him. His parents noticed the change, too. The angry, defiant boy they had worried about had grown into someone thoughtful, compassionate, and responsible. One evening, as Ryan helped Carla close up the center, she handed him a small envelope. "What's this?" he asked, looking at her curiously. "Just a little recognition for all your hard work," she said with a smile. Ryan opened the envelope and found a certificate of appreciation, signed by Carla and the rest of the center's staff. Along with it was a handwritten note that read, "Thank you for showing us what growth looks like. We're proud of you." Ryan felt a lump rise in his throat as he read the note. He looked up at Carla, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you," he said. "This means a lot." "You've earned it," Carla said. "And we're lucky to have you here." Months later, Ryan found himself standing outside the community center once again. But this time, he wasn't here to volunteer, he was here to celebrate. The center was hosting an event to unveil a new mural painted on the side of the building, a project that Ryan had helped organize. The mural, designed by a local artist, depicted scenes of unity, resilience, and hope, with bright colors and bold lines that seemed to leap off the wall. As the crowd gathered, Marcus took the stage to say a few words. Dressed in his usual sharp suit, he looked out at the audience with a calm confidence that Ryan had come to admire. "This mural represents the heart of this community," Marcus began. "It's a testament to the strength we find in each other and the beauty that comes from working together. It's also a reminder that no matter where we come from or what we've been through, we all have the power to grow, to change, and to make a difference." Ryan listened intently, his chest swelling with pride. He thought about how far he had come since that day in the parking lot, how much he had learned and grown. He wasn't the same person anymore, and for that he was grateful. After the event, as people admired the mural and mingled, Marcus approached Ryan. "What do you think?" he asked, gesturing to the mural. "It's amazing," Ryan said. "I'm glad I got to be a part of it." You were more than a part of it, Marcus said. You helped make it happen. Don't forget that. Ryan nodded, his smile genuine. Thanks. For everything. Marcus placed a hand on Ryan's shoulder, his expression warm. Keep going, Ryan. The world needs more people willing to make a difference. I will, Ryan said, his voice steady. I promise. As Marcus walked away, Ryan turned back to the mural, his gaze lingering on the vibrant colors and powerful imagery. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the mistakes he had made, and the lessons he had learned. And for the first time, he felt a deep sense of peace. He wasn't defined by his past anymore. He was defined by the choices he made moving forward.